It is a Thursday afternoon, and he joins us as he always does, Tim Bourret. Tim, welcome in. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing great, Lawton. How are you?
Doing fantastic. College football again on the horizon. I know you guys are headed up to Syracuse tomorrow for that matchup between Clemson and the Orange. It's always a strange venue. You've been up there several times. What's your take anytime you go to the now JMA Mobile Dome?
Well, I listened to Ben Boulware do an interview this week on the local station up here in Clemson, and he said they could play a game in that dome with just 3 Syracuse fans, and it would seem loud. And that's kind of the way it is. I mean, it doesn't hold 50,000 maybe for football, but boy, it really makes a lot of noise. I was at practice on Wednesday here, and Dabo cranked up that crowd noise recording as loud as I can remember to try to simulate what it's going to be like.
Well, and they are an undefeated ball club. Obviously, Garrett Straight. I can't say his name right now for whatever reason. The straw that the straw that stirs the drink. I think trying to say Strader and straw kind of threw me off. But anyway, with the job that he's done, I mean, he's really a tough guy to deal with.
Yeah, it seems like every week we're talking about a great opposing quarterback that Clemson's going to face, and that's certainly the case this week. I did the pregame interview with Dabo, and he talked about how everything is in their offense is run-pass option, and it all goes through him. He's got a lot of responsibility on his shoulders, but he's been outstanding this year, one of the national leaders in total offense. He had 195 yards rushing at Purdue, which is not a 1AA school. It's a Power 5 school. And, he's been very successful throwing the ball, but just such a threat to run. Even when factoring in sacks, he averages 6.9 yards a carry.
Again, that's Garrett Schrader. It's a lot easier to say when you're not trying to say straw after his name, I can assure you. So don't use that on the radio this weekend, Tim, when you're up there. You're talking about Schrader. How about Cade Klubnik? Here's something I noted. Like, I don't think it's fair to compare Cade Klubnik as a freshman to what you saw from Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson simply because of the amount of snaps and plays that those guys got to play as freshmen. But I did look at their first 4 games as sophomores. And I think if fans dig in, and I know you're a numbers guy, Tim, you might be surprised to find out that Cade Klubnik, even though the team is 2-2, and those 2 guys were 4-0 at this point in their sophomore years, Cade Klubnik's numbers are better than both Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence at this point as a sophomore.
Especially when you look at he's got 9 touchdown passes to just 2 interceptions. The problem, obviously, is he's got 3 lost fumbles. I don't think those guys had 3 lost fumbles, but Cade's been very good, and it's he spread the ball around here, especially recently. But I do think that it's just the turnovers, the nature of the turnovers, the result of the turnovers. Has been the problem. But you're right. I mean, Coach is very happy overall with what Cade has done so far.
Again, on Twitter, at Tim Bourret, go follow him. He joins us every Thursday to talk about your Clemson Tigers. And from that standpoint, Tim, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's one of those things. Coach Sweeney talks about it. Coaches across the country talk about it. It's one thing when you turn the ball over. It's another thing to have a catastrophic turnover where a ball is scooped and scored or an interception's returned for a pick 6. I mean, just to try to overcome that, even when you're winning a game, becomes so difficult. And I can't help but think that this Clemson Tiger team is actually a lot better than their 2-2 resume. And I don't want to be a sunshine pumper, but I believe Dabo Sweeney when he says that this team is really a good football team. They just had some really bad breaks.
Yeah, well, you talk about catastrophic turnovers, and that's been the story of the team so far. So in 2016, Clemson had committed 6 turnovers the first 4 games, but the opposition didn't score a single point off of those turnovers. This year we have just one more turnover than that national championship team had through 4 games, and the opposition has 36 points off of those turnovers. So that has been the problem. But averaging just about 200 yards rushing and passing per game, that's usually the formula for success for Clemson. When before the Duke game, Clemson was 108-0 in its history. We get at least 200 yards rushing and 200 yards passing in the same game, but lost that game at Duke when we did that, and had good balance and well over 400 yards against Florida State. Signs of poor football teams in Clemson history are not teams that average over 400 yards and close to 200 yards rushing and 200 yards passing. So I do think it's a good football team. It just needs to obviously not have the catastrophic turnovers going forward.
Yeah, 145-6 in Clemson's history, or excuse me, since 2011, when having more first downs than their opponents. But I think if you go back to the South Carolina game a year ago, that game, more first downs than a loss. The Tennessee game, more first downs than a loss. The Duke game, more first downs than a loss. And then the Florida State game, Tim. 4 of those 6 games have happened, in a small stretch. I mean, that is – I put the tweet out the other day with the statistics. I'm no math guy. I had to go to some of my buddies who are math guys to get the numbers. I mean, the odds of that happening, it's just minuscule.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we were like, 143-2 until that streak has started. So, but you'll probably find that we have a pretty much a negative turnover margin in those games, and that can counteract it. I mean, you can get 5 first downs on a drive, but if you fumble it inside the 10-yard line or inside the 1, which we did against Duke, that can counteract all the good that you've done to get to that position on the field.
The other stat that I heard, and I didn't verify it because you guys probably have a program over there that'll do it. I was going to have to go through game by game, and maybe that is your program. It's called Interns. But Sweeney has now, I think, lost 2 games in his career where he led in Death Valley by double digits. That's the South Carolina game and then this Florida State game. The past 2 games at home against Power 5 teams. Is that number right as well?
Yeah, I think it is. And it's interesting. Also, I looked up that games we've lost going into the fourth quarter. Now that was not the case this week, but Clemson's actually won 42 straight road games when on opponent's home field when leading going into the fourth quarter. We've had a couple, that have been at home, but we've been really good on the road in that regard, which I think would be the opposite case. The teams who've made comebacks against us on the road. But South Carolina certainly had a comeback against us at home, and last year, and Florida State did it this past week.
Yeah, it's wild what's going on. And again, he is a stat guy. Go follow him at Tim Bourret, the former Clemson SID for 40 plus years. So my dad loves this segment. As a matter of fact, I was talking to him yesterday, and he said on a Wednesday, Tim, he said, "You know what tomorrow is, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, Tim Bourret's coming on." Well,
I'm honored that he feels that way.
Yeah, he wants to know a little bit more about the tradition with the Rock at Clemson. And I told him that it was a great timing on his part because it was just 57 years ago, I guess, coming up this past weekend, that Clemson debuted the Rock atop the hill and all of that. So give me some insight, because when you arrive in 78, I mean, it's a tradition, but it's far from what it is today, I would assume. What was it like by comparison to this era when you first watched it?
You mean as far as the overall tradition of rubbing the rock and running down the hill?
Yeah, just the whole band, and there used to be balloons. I mean, there's been some changes. The cheerleaders with the big banner. Yeah, give us an idea about the whole tradition.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right in that regard. It's a little bit But when I first started in 1970, well, actually 77 was the first game I ever attended. Was a Notre Dame game in Death Valley, and it was well known then. I remember the Chicago Sun-Times did a big story about it, and of course, Clemson. I mean, Notre Dame football fans were aware of it, but I think it was Bill Gleason that wrote the story, and it was a full page in the Chicago Sun-Times. That certainly brought a lot of attention to it. But as far as Rubbing the Rock didn't start until 1967. People asked me last week, because last week was the anniversary of the Wake Forest game in '67, which was the first time they rubbed the rock, and they said, well, how come they didn't rub the rock in 1966 when the rock was first put up there? Quite frankly, nobody thought to do it. It was Coach Howard's finally his idea to do it, and then he talked about it on his coach's show. That's actually when you first mentioned either give 110% or don't rub my rock. He said that on his television show the next day, and Mr. Bradley, of course, wrote about it, wrote a lot of releases about it, and made it famous. But there haven't been all that many changes to the overall tradition as far as rubbing the rock coming down the. You're right. Probably the biggest change was we don't have the balloons anymore because of the environmental problems that can be created. We actually released 363,000 balloons before the 1983 Maryland game, which at the time set a Guinness Book of Records for balloon launch. And I remember writing stories about it. There was one cluster of balloons ended up in Laurinburg, North Carolina, if you can believe that, which is like a 5-hour drive away. We got a picture of this guy's family with it in his backyard. It landed in his backyard. So, but unfortunately, that aspect of it we don't have anymore. But it's still pretty grand tradition.
Yeah, no, it's a awesome entrance. I know everybody around the country tunes in to check it out, especially when Clemson's got a big night game and you really kind of feel the ambiance of what that's become. I will ask you this on that front. How about the cannon? I mean, has the cannon been there as long as you recall?
Yes. So the cannon actually goes back to the 50s. George Bennett, God bless us, is over 90 years old and still with us. He was the head cheerleader in 1954. And his father actually had the idea of sounding a cannon when the team ran down the hill. So his father bought him the original cannon that was used to fire off when the Clemson team ran down the hill. So I know that tradition goes back until at least 1954.
Unbelievable. That is great. That's why we have him on, to give us the scoop on all things Clemson. He's Tim Bourret, and he joins us every Thursday afternoon. So that's a little bit of the tradition there with the Hill. Final thing on that front, I'll ask you about the big banner that the cheerleaders run down. I assume I remember that from when I was a kid. I don't know how long that's been there, but I remember they used to run it down. It had a paw with a big number 1 on it, I guess, after the 81 national championship. I think now it's just a regular tiger paw and maybe says Clemson Tigers on it. But give us what do you know about that tradition and how that came to be?
Well, I know that tradition goes back to at least 1977. And I know that because when they published the Notre Dame highlight film from that year and they did a game-by-game rundown of each game, they opened the segment on the Clemson Notre Dame game, talking about how Clemson was going for its 100th victory in Death Valley, and the footage they had behind the narration was a picture of the Clemson cheerleaders carrying that big flag across the field, and it had a big tiger paw on it. And you're right, they did a new one for the 1982 season after Clemson won the 1981 national championship. So yeah, if you go on YouTube and Google 1977 Notre Dame football highlight film, you can advance it to that Clemson game, and you'll see that there was a flag here at Clemson, at least in 1977.
Well, I feel like another thing that has changed since I was in school 25 years ago, I think I believe when I started, Tim, we only had the paw flag. There was only the paw. You didn't run out the C, the L, the E, the M. Like I feel like it was just the paw at that point. Am I right on that, or is my memory just scrambled?
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, it was one big flag with a paw. I think that's what the way it was for a number of years. Correct.
Man, I'll tell you what, it is still a grand spectacle, and no matter how many times I see it, I don't know if it's because I'm a graduate or what. The hair on my arm still stands up to this day, watching the Tigers pour in to Death Valley through that great tradition. Again, Tim Bourret with us here for a few more minutes. So we'll turn our attention back to that big matchup between the Tigers and the Syracuse Orange this weekend. Tim, I don't know. You know, every game's important. We know that. You know, it's always a season of one game. But man, it sure feels like at this point for this Clemson Tiger team to avoid going 0-3 to open up league play for the first time since I want to say 1998, sometime around there. It feels like this is a must-win game.
Yeah, it would be the first time in 25 years if Clemson was to start off 0-3 in the league. And you're right. I mean, I just kind of have a feeling that this game, it will determine whether we're going to relive 2010 or 2014. And I both of those teams got off to slow starts. The 2009 team also did. We actually started 2-3 overall. We had a loss to PCU, I believe, in there early in the season, so it wasn't a conference game. But yeah, no, let's be honest. That's the way that it is going into this, and Clemson's got a tough schedule after this. I mean, we look at Miami's an undefeated team, North Carolina's an undefeated team. Notre Dame's got one loss, but they're obviously really good, and South Carolina sure looked good this past week. So a lot of tough games remaining, but it starts off with you can't win them all on one Saturday. You got to start somewhere, and that's this week against a very good Syracuse team that's also undefeated. There's 6 ACC teams undefeated, most in the country, which actually is the first time since 2012 any conference has had this many undefeated teams at least 4 weeks into the season. But Syracuse is a team with a terrific quarterback, as we said, and their defense is unlike any other that you're going to play. They play a 3-3-5. Their defensive coordinator is Rocky Long, who's in his 49th year as a full-time assistant coach at the college level. When he started his career, Jabo Sweeney was in kindergarten in Alabama. So he has been around a long time. That said, he is not. When you go to Syracuse under Dino Babers, you don't bring your defensive concepts with you. You adapt to what Dino wants to do, and that's at 3-3-5. And when I did the interview with Dabo today, with Saturday's pregame show, he compared it to it's like Georgia Tech's offense under Paul Johnson, in that it's unusual in the specific rules that you have to follow.
Yeah, I heard Urban Meyer talking about a 3-3-5 defense the other day and just saying how difficult that is to face. Tim, always appreciate you. Thank you so much for your insight. Safe travels up to Syracuse, and you guys have a great weekend. Look forward to talking to you next week.
Sounds good.